Hi again, everybody. I'm Jamie Allison, and this is the Big Idea, Big Moves podcast. This is the destination for high performers, people looking at whole life success. We've talked to people from different genres, people from different niches, just people doing really interesting things in their space, find out a little bit more about what they're doing, and hopefully take away some of those things from their journey and maybe some tips from them that we can apply to our own lives as well. So we've talked to lots of CEOs, entrepreneurs, lots of athletes, scientists, just again, people doing really interesting things that we can take a little bit away from them as well. So I know I have one of those today. Just before we jump into that, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know we have a connection with Epitome Sportswear. And, you know, the one thing about that, one of the things about that is that it's not just kind of sportswear for those kind of elite athletes that might be listening, but also just anybody who is, you know, maybe taking their son or daughter to the hockey game or going out for a hike as we kind of head into spring, some of those kind of things. Really interesting stuff and is focused on kind of living life fully. But the other thing that we really like as well is it's also important to them to give back to the communities that they serve as well. And they're working to impact the inequities in opportunity for girls and women in sport. And for that reason, a portion of their profits go to organizations and initiatives that support girls in sports. So check them out for sure at Epitome, so EPITOME sportswear.com, or you can go right into our Instagram bio and you'll see a connection through there as well. And I think a savings code as well. So take a look at that and see if it makes sense for you. You know, today we have a really interesting conversation. Emily Lyons is with us today. She's a powerhouse entrepreneur who's built multiple successful businesses, and her journey to to running luxury brands and rubbing shoulders with A-list clients, all these fun things, is really quite inspiring because of how she's got there and how she's been able to build these multiple businesses. So she's not just about kind of business; she's about breaking barriers, creating opportunities, and also giving back as well. So today we'll go into kind of that story, hopefully a little bit, Emily, and maybe some of the mindset and lessons that you've learned through kind of those years. You know, first of all, I know you're super busy with all of these things that you have going on, so thank you for taking the time with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, so Emily, so one of the things is that there's probably lots of people who've been following kind of what you do or know different parts of the businesses that maybe you've dealt with, but I know that you've kind of had a bit of a non-traditional way of getting there, I guess, in your journey. So maybe just help us understand that a little bit. You know, were you always a self-starter, and maybe just kind of how did that progress work for you a little bit from a high level?
Uh, I think it sort of just came to be as a fluke. I read a book and it talked about entrepreneurship and how anybody can be an entrepreneur by just taking something that you're passionate about and finding a way to monetize that. And when I read the book, it really simplified things. And this was, I mean, going back 15, 16 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it made me think in a way that I hadn't thought before. And coming from a small city where entrepreneurship was never anything that I was exposed to, and it was never anything that I thought possible for me, all of a sudden this light bulb clicked in my head of this is what I want to do. And up until that point, I hadn't had a job that I liked, I mean, maybe tolerated,
Yeah.
and really struggled to make ends meet and to be consistent and stick with anything for the long term. So right away, the excitement built and hasn't really stopped.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess was your first major one, was it Femme Fatale? Was that the kind of the first major kind of business that you created?
Femme Fatale
And
Media started that 15 years ago.
yeah, and yeah, so 2009-ish, I guess, if I'm right, but thereabouts. And you know, how did that start out? I mean, because it is something where you know that you know it may have started as an idea, but you created something quite big. So maybe just talk to us about you know how that started for you.
So it started very small. And when I read this book and I tried to think of what is it that I'm passionate about. And at the time, I mean, being in my early 20s, I had a part-time job as a promotional model, brand ambassador, where I was going to events and socializing with people. And at the time I thought, wow, what an incredible thing. But I mean, it wasn't something I could do full time. It wasn't a full-time position. But I thought if I could have an agency that provides those staff,
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, and so, like I said, it started really small, and I just figured out the local what would the needs were there, and built it there. And then as I grew, I saw the real opportunity, which was to move into corporate, into large scale events, into the luxury market, into the experiential marketing side, and building it, all the things out. But that came way down the road, and it all snowballed. But initially it was very, very small, and it started with me, asking some of the people that I was working with if they would join my agency, and
Mhm.
literally going around to every venue around the city that I was in, which was Toronto, and handing out these very cheap business cards that I got for $20 or something, that were terrible, and using some free marketing service to send out emails to as many people as I could. And that was how I got the first client.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's interesting to see how maybe that kind of unconventional idea to start with, how it kind of builds, I guess, from that end, and how you can take something that maybe people haven't done in that way, and it's built over time.
Well, I think it really, when I think back to the book, which is quite old now, it's called Career Renegade.
Hmm.
But it's true that you can take anything, any area, and find some unique way to monetize it. And it doesn't have to be something so obvious as staffing. It can get really, really creative.
Hmm. Hmm. And you, I mean, you have done that, but you also kind of because it's branding that you do as well, and a lot of things kind of how do you build that brand? You've done an excellent job not only building a brand, but the other companies that you've done, they do have a bit of a fit. I mean, you've kind of taken a luxury market, you've taken Lions Elite and a couple of other things that are similar but different companies, but have kind of a brand line, I guess, through them. Was that something that you thought to do? Is it something that just happened organically? What was that like for you?
I love the process of building a business. I love,
Hmm.
seeing it come to life. And so just different areas in my life that I was really passionate about, these ideas came up, and I just kind of had to see them through. And I mean, there's been some that I started with and realized that it wasn't a fit, there wasn't a market for it, or whatever it might be, and stopped with those ones. But
Yeah,
there's been some great ones. Yeah,
yeah,
Lion King was in 2014, and that kind of came to be because we were kind of, I was already doing that. I was introducing people. We're a luxury matchmaking agency. And
yeah,
I was introducing people. I introduced my lawyer to his wife. And so it was just kind of this natural progression into what is matchmaking, what is missing in some of the core markets, how can we be different, and diving into that.
Now you mentioned that, I mean, not every idea it turns out to be the right one as you go along. How hard is that? Because that's the one thing a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with is that they kind of create something or start to create something and maybe hold on to it a little too long because they're so invested in it personally that they maybe don't see the signs, or they do and feel like, okay, I'm going to make it work some way. Um, how did you kind of make those decisions, and is it something that you struggled with as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So there's a number of different things that I would say to do. And one of them being, if you don't want to give up on the business in itself or being an entrepreneur,
Hmm.
but it's not working, then you don't need to give up, but you need to pivot. So you need to find a different way, tweak the product, tweak the usage for it, or things like that. But I like to, at the beginning, start really small and get as much feedback as possible from customers, from users, from potential customers of, how do they see your product or your service fitting into their life? What would benefit would it give to them? Because quite often as entrepreneurs, we get so passionate about what we're doing that we think that this is why people want it. And we
Yeah,
push that on them,
yeah,
but they'll tell us what they want.
yeah,
So I think testing it, seeing if there is a market for it. And if there isn't, then figuring out how could there be, like, what do I need to do to pivot to make it a fit, and to being willing to adapt and try new things to see what works and then double down on that.
yeah, yeah. And you talk about talking to your clients and using your clients to help guide you that way. Um, do you have specific mentors that you use, or do you kind of like how do you approach that? Do you take little bits away from a bunch of different people? Do you have a couple of people that really kind of stood out as, that's the model of what I would like to be able to do? What was that like for you, Emily?
No mentors, but I did talk to a lot of clients early on, and for each company, really just getting as much feedback. I mean, I even did, survey monkeys where I would send out
Mhm.
surveys to all the clients where they could anonymously give us feedback
Yeah.
because we got so much valuable stuff from that where we could figure out, okay, this is what we're missing. This is what the entire industry is missing. This is where we're lacking. These are services we could add, things like that, and then implemented those along the way. And it gives great ideas too. So I think, no, my customers were probably the biggest mentors I had. And then just podcasts and reading and Blinkist and things like that.
Yeah, 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 and it's interesting that you say about the surveys part as well, because I think that also there's a certain vulnerability there in being able to make sure that people, you have to be okay with hearing the good stuff, which is in
Yeah.
there, but
It's
the most
bad.
valuable is the bad stuff a lot of the time too. So that's
People
interesting
love
because
to
I think a lot of
see
people don't want to hear
feedback.
that, but that's the where you get the best value, right? Is out of those
Absolutely.
things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you're doing something consistently wrong that you don't know about, well, you want to know about it earlier, sooner than later.
Right,
So
right.
fix
Yeah, because that
it.
could be your kind of critical gap at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you and maybe this is how do you do it personally, and then maybe does that translate into your businesses, but how do you approach goal setting? I mean, are you a write everything down kind of person that here's what I'm going to do this year, here's all the stuff I'm going to do, and or is it do you take a bit by, how it comes? How do you approach that?
I kind of do both. I like to write it down. I like to write it out, and I try to be consistent with that, just because I find that it does have a lot of benefits for me. It keeps it in the forefront of my mind, what I'm working towards, why, bringing the emotion behind it, and putting it through it. And, I like to write down why I'm doing it, the impact I want to make, and then I like to write it in the present tense as if I've already achieved it. So I like
Hmm,
to do that. As I did that this morning.
yeah.
Just reiterated my goals and wrote then down. I actually go through a day in the life of what my day would look like when I'm living as that person.
Hmm. Wow. So almost a kind of a visualization at the same time when you're doing it.
And I write as much details as I can for it. I don't always do that, but I do love to do it. And it just gives me a big picture. And I find that too, when I do that and I know what I'm working towards, then I notice like subtle cues that help guide me towards that I might miss, that I would then jump on because I'm like, that's going to get me closer to the goal that I'm working towards.
Yeah, yeah. Is there something that you have seen as you've kind of been going through this journey a little bit that well, that was way more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Like I'm sure there's many of those points when you're an entrepreneur, you have to learn it all and but is there something that stands out as wow, that was a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be.
A lot more difficult. I think probably for me, it was legal.
Mm,
The first time got lawyers involved.
yeah.
It was really difficult for me, way more stressful than I thought, way more expensive than I thought. And early on, I just went by a handshake and agreement. I didn't have contracts.
Hmm.
I thought, you agree to something, you give your word, you follow through.
Yep.
Not everybody, of course, operates.
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
was something that was really hard for me to accept, coming from the small city that I came from and the family that I did. Of we stand by our word, we're about integrity, and
Hmm.
it was a very big eye opener. And yeah, now everybody gets a contract, and
Yeah. As you get larger too, right? Like it's all of those things as a business as you get larger from that perspective. It just there's
um,
there, that bureaucracy you're not used to just has to happen sometimes in some areas just to protect yourself too. So, um, You mentioned about the kind of stress that comes with that. So how do you manage that when you talked about goals. You probably have business goals and what your day looks like and things like that, but you probably also have things you want to do socially, things you do outside of work, all of those things, and how do you try to balance some of that, or can you, and how do you alleviate some of the stress by kind of doing some of that and maybe approaching and looking at it in a different way.
Well, first of all, I think that it's important to just to point out that life is inherently stressful. So people ask a lot, how do you deal with stress when you're building these things or going after these things? Or I could never do that because it's too stressful. But you're going to have stress in your life, whether you're going after your dreams or you're not. So you might as well have the good stress that goes along with something that you actually want. And, at the end of the day, when I've lived my life, I want to look back and say, oops, instead of, what if? Like, why didn't I try? So for me, business stuff doesn't stress me out. Life things stress me out, completely unrelated. But
Yeah.
best way that I can manage it is just by being as healthy as possible. So working out, eating healthy, getting sleep. When I don't get sleep, I am not good. Rest, I am not thinking clearly. And when you're super healthy, your mind is so much sharper, you're so much more resilient, you can handle your emotions, you're empathetic. So
Yeah.
I think it's just so crucial to get 8 hours of sleep as an entrepreneur. And also too, we get caught up in that hustle, hustle, hustle. We always have to be working.
Mm,
And I don't want to be the richest person in the graveyard. At the end of the day, that's more important than anything that I'm building because I want to be able to enjoy the things with my family and enjoy my life. So health is my biggest priority above
yeah. And
most.
has that always been the case, or is it, because everyone goes through seasons, right? And everybody has learning as they go along. And I would wonder early in your career, and I just think of, a lot of people when they're early in it, it's very different than it is as you start to get further along and realize, oh, you know what, maybe it's not all, I don't have to work 21 hours out of a day and things like
That
that.
was not at all the case. Worked crazy hours, worked till like 4 a.m.
Yeah.
And I thought that was, a badge of honor. I thought that was a great thing to brag about. Of I don't have work-life balance. I work all the time. Ha, ha. That must mean I'm doing something right. It's nothing to brag about. I literally worked myself sick. I had terrible mental health, terrible anxiety and panic attacks. I drank all the time. I smoked. I wasn't doing anybody any favors, certainly not myself or my business. And when
Mhm.
I stopped drinking, which was in 2011, that was when I saw, and I changed my lifestyle. That was when I saw things actually really grow. And I was working far less, but I was doing it much more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, and I think there are a lot of people who need to kind of hear that too, because understanding that it doesn't mean that you didn't do well in your business or grow in your business and do all of those things that you want to be able to do, but you do it in a more healthy way, I guess, from that end. And it doesn't mean you have to hustle, and that's the only way from point A to point B as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, you've really built your own brand as well too, Emily. Like aside from the businesses that you do, you've built your own brand alongside that. And I wonder, has that been something that you've done intentionally? Like, have you been intentional about building your brand outside of that, or has it just been something that has happened for you because it's a little more innate for you because of, obviously what you must enjoy. But how is that for you? Was it intentional?
Not at the beginning. At the beginning, I was just kind of posting the story of what I was doing, behind the
Yeah.
scenes things. And then when I did have those struggles with mental health, when I was overworked and I was stressed, my sister passed away,
Hmm.
and I started posting about that. And
Yeah.
that was when I started to see people really connecting with me and sort of the opposite effect of what I expected to happen. I expected it to be a lot of judgment and maybe lose some clients, but I was kind of using it as an outlet. I mean, this was 2011.
Hmm.
And so then when I saw that, I just saw I can help people. I can make an impact through my story. So then I started showing up in that regards to show my failures and my struggles, that it wasn't all this picture perfect image that we all make it out to be.
Hmm.
And then from there, I saw the businesses grow. And so then it started to be, well, actually, a university came to me many years ago and asked if I would come and speak about personal branding.
Hmm.
I said, and I Googled what is personal branding because I think we're going to speak about this. And I was like, oh. And so that was when I was like, okay, this is a thing. And so that was when I was more invested in showing up consistently, but
Yeah.
still with the same overall goal of ultimately just wanting to help people, to make an impact, and hopefully, somebody that might be starting from an underdog position or struggling, where some part of my story might motivate them or inspire them or just help them to keep going, something,
Yeah.
do something for them is my
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you've done that in a bunch of ways because I know um, there's a foundation honoring your sister that you also had done a lot at that time to kind of help give back, not just for the people that were listening about your story outside of that, but our very personal impact as well. And that probably um, was not only helpful in going through the process, but is probably something that you look back on and think, okay, I've really, I've made a difference from it, which I guess must be gratifying from that end.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that was probably the best thing that I've done, was the foundation for my sister.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
foundation. Mhm.
Well, and so beyond financial success, because obviously you've done a lot of that, and you've done a lot of kind of building things. Has that changed, I guess, from that end? Do you kind of think more about what you want to give back to the world generally, or is it like, have you thought about that very much yet? Like, do you have an idea of what you want to what kind of legacy you want to leave from that standpoint?
I'm not entirely sure yet. It kind of changes as I change. I do know that I want to build a wing or a hospital in memory of my mom and my sister.
Mhm.
It's a big
Yeah,
goal. But the lasting impact, I'm not sure. I,
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I really
Well,
not.
I mean, that's a big thought as it is. So yeah, that's great. You've done a lot of things where you've worked with big names. You've been able to kind of rub shoulders with a lot of kind of A-list people and everything. Is there some interaction or person that stood out as, okay, this person really impacted me personally, or that just that experience was, well, for me that was huge to be able to either meet that person or be able to work with that person. Is there something like that for you, Emily?
Uh, I thought Snoop Dogg was pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. That would be pretty cool.
Pretty neat. I was surprised by not him, but other celebrities, and just the attitude that a lot of them have.
Hmm.
They'd be a lot more humble and grateful, but a lot of big attitudes. So
Yeah.
other than that, no, not nobody that's really made any sort of significant impact, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it is interesting that yeah, the more people have, sometimes that seems to be more the case. They're not as relatable, maybe, if you want to be nice about it. So, but yeah, so one of the things is that we do with everybody that we have on the show, Emily, is to try to leave a couple of things. And I know we've probably talked about a lot of those things. There's lots of entrepreneurs that listen to the podcast. Lots of people who also are probably thinking about are looking at what you've done and thinking this is something that I might want to do. Do you have a couple of thoughts or tips on pieces of advice that if there's somebody who's kind of on the fence or is starting to think about this, that you'd have for that kind of aspiring entrepreneur and who's maybe in your position, and what you could pass on from the wealth of knowledge you have?
Master speed over perfection.
Hmm.
Your ability to execute quickly and iterate beats trying to get it perfect every single time.
Yeah.
Done is better than perfect, and the momentum is what's going to create opportunities and growth. We wait so long for everything to be perfect or the perfect time that it either never happens, or by the time we do, the opportunity is past us. So just start, get perfect later or get perfect never, but just start.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, and that's entrepreneurs, but that's also larger businesses too. I mean, I think of how many organizations are in that analysis paralysis piece where you spend too much time and really nothing's getting done because everybody feels it has to be perfect before you launch something, and instead
You got to get
it's
a
launch
million
it and go.
approvals.
Well, and I love the fact that you talked about talking to your customers and then course correcting as you go, and really that can be pretty much anything that you can start something and then get feedback and change, and there's nothing that has to be. Things can be living documents, things can be things that change over that time.
Mhm.
Is there something that because you went through COVID, you went through kind of all of these other challenges that went through. Is there something that, like, you've obviously got resilience,
Mhm.
both personally and have built that into your businesses. Where does that come from? I mean, is that something that's just innate in you, or is it something that's built up over time? What's that come from?
I think we all have resilience. We just have to, yeah, build it. It's just kind of like a muscle. And the more we
Mm,
use it, the more we show up. And I mean, it's either quit or keep going. It's not like this big thing I think that we make it out to be. And to keep going and find a way to make it work, to find a way to keep going after the things that you love and you want, for me is always better than just giving up and throwing in the hat.
yeah,
And
yeah.
just looking for the positive in every situation and the opportunity in every situation has been such a game changer for me.
How much has, I mean, that's kind of positive mindset stuff. How much has having that kind of mindset impacted you personally? Like, it is,
Oh, game changer, a game changer. I mean, because you can look at all the negative things in your life, My sister died, my mom died, my dad had cancer, my brother almost died. Sorry, someone's
okay.
waving to me there. And so I could say, poor me, look at all these things stacked against me. Or
Yeah,
hey, look at all the positives in my life. I had an amazing mother, an amazing sister that even though I lost them, I still had them and they were absolutely the best mother and sister that I could have asked for. And my dad and my brother survived. And I have the opportunity. I live in a fantastic country, Canada. I have the opportunity to chase my dreams. I'm healthy. The sun is shining. I have air in my lungs. There's a million things to be grateful for. And a simple gratitude practice that I do most days is I just list 5 things that I'm grateful for. And I find that it just naturally has your mind looking for positive things throughout the day
yeah,
because you're going to list them and then you focus on those things and you see those things that you might otherwise not see. And so now my mind naturally goes to that and I'll find it really being present in the moment and appreciating little things, little wins, little, like it's warmer today and it just made me so happy. And so
yeah,
I would say, yeah, having a gratitude practice, it just personally and professionally, it just makes life so much better too. I mean, why wouldn't you want to be happy? Why wouldn't you want to? We can't control a lot of the things that happen to us, but we can control how we respond to those things.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's no better way to kind of wrap things up today than leaving it, there, because I mean, that it's inspiring to hear what you've done, but it's also nice to be able to think of how looking at things positively also kind of does create opportunity. It does open your eyes to opportunity, all of those things as well. And it's been a great conversation. Thank you for that, Emily. And if people are wanting to follow you or to kind of see things about what are some of the best ways to do that?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn
Mhm.
and I'm pretty active on Instagram. So you
All
can
right.
search me. I'm Emily Lyons on Instagram, Lyoness, and just Emily Lyons on LinkedIn.
All right. And what we'll do is we'll put those in the show notes as well. So if you missed that, click through, follow Emily. Really inspiring, what some of the stuff that you're doing, and I'm sure people want to be able to follow that and see and maybe take away some more inspiration, just seeing kind of what you're doing from building businesses and things like that as well. If you haven't hit subscribe on the podcast, do that now. We have great people just like Emily every week. And again, I know you're super busy, so really appreciate you taking the time with us today, Emily. It was
Oh,
great.
my pleasure. My
All
pleasure.
right. And we will talk to everybody else again on Big Idea, Big Moves.